Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. Today we are talking to the wonderful Parrish Wilson. Parrish, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I have so many questions for you, but we'll get into that when you start telling your story. Just how about we just start with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a mom to two boys, and both boys are on the spectrum. So it's a challenging experience being a mom, as it is for all moms. And I'm also a writer and a writing therapist. So I've worked in the world of mental health and writing throughout my career, and now I weave those together in writing therapy. Yeah,
Beautiful. Awesome. I love it. So
thank you.
let's dive right into your story because your story is different than uh most of the stories I think we've had so far. So also, by the way, welcome to season 2. We
Mm.
just celebrated our 1-year anniversary last week, so you are the first episode of our second year of the
Ah,
podcast.
well, that's awesome. Congratulations to you
Thank
and good
you.
work that you're doing with this.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, you have a totally different experience than most people. So tell us about it. Let's just go there. You
Sure.
not only, like a lot of people, I'm going to keep talking for a second. A lot of our guests sort of go through a situation or a moment in time where they feel suicidal, where life has just gotten too much and they need the pain to end and everything. But it's more than that for you. Like it's ongoing. So I
Mhm.
want to know everything in case there are people listening who are experiencing the same thing and, aren't getting the help that they need.
Yeah, thank you. And that's why it was really important for me to come on, because I think that when we do talk about suicide, we can often think of, just a time in your life where things get really hard and you just hit that point sort of once because circumstances are exceptionally difficult. But for a lot of people like myself, suicidal ideation is a more regular experience. It's part of our lives, part of our thought processes. Um, so I have dealt with mental health issues my whole life. And in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with depression with a seasonal influence. Um, at one point, I had a psychiatrist suggest bipolar. And I was in the field too. I was working in mental health myself. And I just never felt like any of the labels that I was aware of fit, at least in the ways that I understood them. And so I spent just a long time feeling like, okay, it was just depression, maybe, and sort of going into really low moods, seeing some alignment with the seasons and that being more common in the winter. But still just always feeling like no matter what I did, like no matter how good I was feeling and how well I took care of myself, I would still like hit a low really quite consistently. And, the psychiatrist explained this as bipolar. But that didn't really seem to fit because like I wasn't having manic episodes. Like nothing just really seemed to fit or make
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s, um, and actually had even separated from my husband. And I started to feel like, you know what? It's always worse before my period. And I just like put into Google one day in 2018, depression before your period, and up popped premenstrual dysphoric disorder or PMDD or PMD. It goes by many different acronyms. Um, and reading about PMDD, suddenly everything made sense.
Mm.
And I even remembered like my now ex-husband at one point saying, like, every time you're premenstrual, you tear our life apart.
Wow.
And it was like really, I was able then to kind of like, once I had this term, I was able to sort of track things back and realize that, like, that's what was happening to me. Like, I was having 2 weeks a month where I felt good and no problem, and life was excellent. And then no matter what I did, I would fall into a really serious state of mental illness for that time between ovulation and the first few days of my period. And if the DSM, so the Diagnostical Statistic Manual, it has PMDD has been very controversial in the DSM. It has been put in, it has been taken out. As we know, research and understanding around women's mental health is very limited.
And women's physical health.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And so PMDD has been, yeah, debated greatly as to whether or not it should be in the DSM.
Does it
It
just fall under hysteria?
yeah, like it's all the same thing, right? Um, but they have it like, they also, what really irritates me is they have it so tightly defined. So it has to be in the 4 days before you get your period. And if it's outside of that time, but still in your premenstrual period, it doesn't count.
What? Yeah,
And
because all women have exactly the same cycles.
right,
Right.
right. And like all the women I talk to with PMDD, none of them experience it like that. Like for me, it's almost fully 2 weeks and 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Like 2 weeks good and 2 weeks that I have to be careful. Like it's not 4 days of my cycle. It is far more than 4 days of my cycle. But it was really transformative to learn about this and to learn that actually one of the things that occurs, one of one of the things that really does define PMDD is its really high suicide rate. So the statistics right now, and let's start with PMDD is highly underdiagnosed. So
Right.
right now they say about 5 to 8% of women have a PMDD diagnosis. That's way underdiagnosed, right?
Yes.
So absolutely that's going to be a higher number. And then what we do know of those diagnosed with PMDD, about 35% will make an attempt on their life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So this is a dramatic mental health experience that's happening to so many women on a regular basis. And they're being laughed at like they've got PMS or they're moody or they're just being difficult when they're really in an extreme state of mental illness at that point.
Right. Because of their hormones.
Because of something. So so there is a lot of medical research right now going into PMDD,
Good.
and um it is unknown at this time what causes it. It
Mm.
is instigated by hormonal changes, but it may not necessarily be a hormonal imbalance. I personally, based on my own experience and my reading and my research, feel that it is trauma and that it's just that at that time in our cycle, our body will feel our trauma and make it, show us what we have to heal and what we have to work on.
Oh, wow.
So I know now if I have, and my PMDD is in a great place because of trauma healing, entirely because of trauma stuff. Um, and so I know now, well, first of all, like I have to take better care of myself during that period of my cycle. So
Hmm.
I don't expect as much of myself socially. I make sure I'm getting good rest. If I wake up one day and I'm like, oh my God, I can't do the day. I just cancel my day. I don't get down on myself that that's how I feel. It's just like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, it's the week before my period. Of course I want a day off. I need that. Okay,
Right.
I'll give myself that. So there is lifestyle adjustments and compassion that come with it. But the biggest source of healing for me has been trauma healing. And I've also heard a number of folks with PMDD put out the hypothesis that it's not just trauma, but it is like patriarchal trauma. So for a lot of women, it will be trauma that's occurred with their father. My father left and moved away when I was 11. So that's sort of the root of it
Hmm.
for me, and
Right.
feeling like I'm not enough, right, to keep him
Hmm.
around. So I know for me, and the thing that I think is really interesting, particularly about the suicidal ideation, is that every cycle I get like a window into, how well am I doing mentally and emotionally? And if I get to my premenstrual period, that time in my cycle, and I'm still feeling good and like not feeling too down, it's like, oh, wow, like, hey, things are really on the right track. And
Right.
that's a great sign to myself. Like right now, I'm premenstrual right now. And it's like I've been able to do a number of things this week. I wasn't that nervous about this interview, so I'm like, oh wow, it's good, right? I'm having a good cycle.
Hmm.
And then when I have a cycle that feels really low and has a lot of anxiety in it, and that's those suicidal thoughts of like, I can't do this, I don't want to do this anymore, why do I have to live like this? When those thoughts come up, and that's the feeling I have, I know, oh, okay, I'm having a harder cycle. There's maybe something in my life that I'm not taking care of. There's maybe some way that I'm feeling like I'm not good enough, or some way that I feel I'm doing too much for others and not enough for myself. Like I almost take those thoughts as information,
Right.
like, how well am I doing? Right? If I have those thoughts, I know I need to like sink a whole bunch more work into self-care. Um, and if those thoughts aren't there, I know I'm doing well. And that's kind of like a litmus test in a way.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, once we've had suicidal ideation, like it just comes back so much more easily anyways. Like our threshold somehow gets like higher over time. Like once we've had the thought, it's easier for that thought to pop back up again.
Yeah.
And I kind of do the same thing now. Like when I have that thought, I was like, whoa, okay, like what's the message? What's going on? What is this trying to tell me? Because I'm consistently depressed, but not, I'm not like suicidally depressed like I have been in the past. So I know if these thoughts just sort of come out of nowhere, I'm like that's trying to tell me something, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't actually want to do anything and it just came out of nowhere. And so then I sit with that and I look at my life and figure out what's missing and what was that instance trying to tell me.
Yeah. And I think it's so valuable when when we destigmatize the thoughts, because a lot of people are scared to say that they think those things.
Hmm.
And so I work as a therapist, and I have some clients who have very severe mental health issues and chronic health issues where their lives, are not what they thought that they would be. And there's a lot of grief to that. And they, from time to time have suicidal thoughts. And even I said to them, like, well, like when life is really, really hard, like it feels so hard and it's been so hard for so long and you're in the messes of it and it feels so thick and so heavy, like the thought is even kind of rational. Like it's still not
Sure.
one you want to follow,
Right.
it's still not a
But it
direction,
makes sense why
but it
you're
makes
feeling that
sense.
way.
Yes, right? And like it doesn't have to be this thing that we feel shame for, because once we also feel shame, right? Then the weight of anxiety and moodiness and depression gets really heavy, and we're not able to share anymore. We're not able to get a lot of relief. But yeah, when we can say like, whoa, I said the last really hard cycle I had, and I tried it. I share with my friends, even I just throw it out and I'll be like, yeah, it was a really rough mental health weekend. Like I didn't do anything. It was one of the worst I've had, and I just shared with that, like just told them, right? And they get it and they understand. And because if we're not telling the truth, then we're hiding the truth.
Mhm.
And then we can't heal, right? We can't
Can't
heal
heal
if we're
and
in
we
pain.
can't get the support that we need.
No, no, we can't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. So let's go back for a bit. I want to know more about the trauma healing work that you've done.
Mm. So the trauma healing that I did for PMDD was hypnosis based. And
Okay.
it is a woman who I believe only works with PMDD and only does hypnosis. And it was, I mean, at that point, I was probably 38 years old. Like I had done so much therapy, so many things to try to feel better.
Mhm.
And it literally was an hour and a half that changed my life. When that session
Wow.
ended, I felt different. And I felt like the trauma had been moved. It wasn't all gone. So she also, you do the big session with her, and then you get like a 20-minute recording of a hypnosis, and you listen to
Mm,
that
mhm.
like every day for 30 days. And so I did that in 2018. I still go back to that hypnosis. If I am having a hard cycle, I go back to that hypnosis. I listen to that again for a number of days, and it's been incredible. Like, I still sometimes laugh that I'm not trained in hypnosis because I work in mental health, and it's the most powerful thing that I've done. But yeah, that's not what I do.
Right.
But I think it's incredible
I
work.
had a session like that one time. It was called Transformational.
Rapid transformational therapy.
Yeah, that.
That's it.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah. That is powerful stuff. Rapid transformational therapy, RTT. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was the big session, and then you get a recording to listen to every day for 3 or 4 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah. It changed my life. It really did. And I still hesitate to recommend that because I can't necessarily say that that's going to happen to anybody else, but that was just my experience. Like, my experience was, it was truly life-changing, and I still use that recording to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. Every modality resonates different with every person, just like every woman's cycle is not 28 days long, and we don't feel dysphoria for exactly 4 days.
Yeah, 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 right?
Yeah. Everybody, yeah, has had different life experiences, and our healing journeys are going to look totally different.
Mhm,
So,
mhm. And I think a part that's there for all of us in mental health, and that I think is also key, and this is a little bit more woo-woo, but I believe that a lot of our wounds are spiritual, and that a lot of the PMDD is spiritual, and is a component of a woman being like really truly disconnected from her body, right? And living in a
mhm,
patriarchal culture where we don't have our bodies honored. We don't have the fact that we like bleed every month and create life in our bodies, like honored and revered in the way that I think that it does deserve to be, and seen as our bodies seen as spiritual bodies. So I know also for some folks in PMDD, what they find helpful is really engaging a feminine spiritual practice.
mhm.
And there's even some evidence, and this is this is what maybe I will do a PhD on one day. There is a little tiny bit of evidence out there that if you take your menstrual blood and return it to the earth every cycle, that will alleviate some of your PMDD symptoms, because you're simply creating a spiritual reconnection to between your body and the earth.
Huh. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
pretty
know a
cool.
lot of, and here's the thing, my first thought is so many people are going to be grossed out by that.
Mhm.
But that goes exactly to what you're saying, is that
Yeah.
we shouldn't be grossed out by that. It's just a normal bodily function, and actually a really amazing bodily function,
Mhm.
given, what it allows us to do.
Given
Um,
it's the whole reason we exist here on earth today.
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, yeah. Everything is so messed up about women's bodies and how we're treated, and especially right now, especially in the US,
Hmm.
with all the craziness that's going on with rules around women's bodies and whether they're allowed to make their own decisions. And it goes back to, how do we view women? How do we view women's bodies? How do we view women's health? And our cycles and all of that. So that just that one little thing that you can do by returning your blood to the earth, and it can, nobody needs to know that you're doing it. You don't
No,
have to advertise it. Nobody else in your family needs to see you do it. Like
no.
it's a very intimate ritual.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, right? And we do, like, our bodies are devalued and controlled. And it is no wonder that our bodies hold trauma.
Yeah.
And so we need to give that space and time in our lives, and even, even how much women like dislike the having their period. Like, anxiety gets created, and depression and moodiness gets socially created just by this idea that we don't like our periods. Like, even if we just started to love our periods, we would instantly feel a little bit better,
Right.
right? If we just stop saying they're a problem in our lives, and instead we're
Mhm.
like, oh wow, this is how I create life. Like,
Yeah.
that's a pretty magical thing to do.
It is. It's just that, we only create life for a couple of years.
Yeah.
We don't need to have our period for 30 of them or 40 of them or however long it is.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, the ratio is a little off, it seems.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and one thing too that I'll put in, um so I would like anybody listening to this, any assigned female at birth who is listening to this, who has like big ups and downs, please, please, please track your moods to your cycle and see if those moods fall into your premenstrual period primarily. Um, and then the other thing that I would say is that PMDD and ADHD, which is a big topic right now, and lots of women are
Mhm.
being diagnosed with ADHD. So PMDD can make ADHD symptoms a lot worse as well.
Makes
So
sense. Yeah.
again, you get to that period of your cycle, and suddenly there's more brain fog, there's, more chaotic thinking, maybe more exhaustion, all of those pieces, and just lower executive functioning. So it's understandable if you have PMDD and like there's a point in your cycle where it feels like everything is falling apart all the time. It's valid that you feel that way, right? And once you know, then you can start to plan, right? And you're not
Yeah.
surprised by it. And you can give yourself that compassion when it shows up, instead of how I always felt, which was like, oh my God, I've just taken such care of myself for the last 2 weeks. Why do I feel crappy today? Oh, I feel crappy because I'm premenstrual, and that's okay. And it'll pass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And um speaking to getting the diagnosis, it sounds like a lot of PMDD is sort of self-diagnosis at this point,
Yes.
because not enough people know about it, not enough people are diagnosing it. But knowing, either if you're officially diagnosed or you just are, pretty sure that's what you have, like that's the first step, because then you can start paying attention and start looking for things. um and same with like everybody, there's a lot of, women especially being diagnosed in their 30s and 40s with ADHD, with autism, um partly because that was, the diagnosis was written for boys,
Hmm.
and it shows up differently in girls. So as children, it wasn't recognized. And now that they're older, they're like, why is my life such a mess? Why
Yeah.
don't I fit in? Oh, it's because I'm neurospicy, right?
Yeah.
Like it's,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
then you add in for women, And so, yeah, so I am diagnosed both ADHD and PMDD. But like, yeah, so you have a woman who maybe has that ADHD diagnosis because we've got lots of awareness around that right now, right? More and more women are getting that diagnosis, thankfully. But like you said, PMDD, it's really hard to get that diagnosis because a lot of people don't know about it. A lot of doctors don't know about it. Like
Right.
I was going in and out of all kinds of mental health stuff for 20 years, and not a single doctor ever mentioned it,
Hmm.
ever even mentioned it. I'm fully trained in mental health, and it was never mentioned. And it was only that I found it myself. And yeah, I went to my doctor and I said, look, I found this, and I had, a couple sort of situations highlighted, like my ex's comment that I tear our life apart every time I'm premenstrual. And for her, she was like, you know what, that's enough. Let's make the diagnosis off of that. You've been struggling all these years, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the diagnosis won't be accessible for everybody, but the awareness is life changing
Yeah.
because you can start to plan your life, right? You're like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, I'm not going to plan the family vacation when I'm
Right.
premenstrual. Right? Because
Yeah.
I'll lose my mind. And if things unfold that way and suddenly we're on family vacation and I'm premenstrual, well, you're gonna communicate up front, like, hey, it's gonna be harder. I'm gonna have to do a little bit less, right? I'm gonna need a little bit more quiet time. And you make those adjustments so that you're not the angry mom come 5 p.m. who's
Hmm.
who's just losing it because everything's chaos around her.
Yeah. Yeah. And the benefit to getting these diagnoses, like even the ADHD and the autism later in life, like a lot of people question that, like, you've made it this far, why are you bothering? And it's because once you know what's going on, once you know how your brain works and why it's different than a lot of people, you have coping skills.
Mhm.
It just life makes more sense and it's easier to manage.
Yeah.
As with any diagnosis. Um,
Yeah. And even like one of the examples I bring up around that as a mental health worker is we treat depression very differently than we treat autistic burnout, but they might look the same.
mhm,
Right. And so if somebody doesn't have that autism diagnosis and we're over here treating it like it's depression, trying to like activate them and get them going when they really need to like rest and shut
right.
down and have no stimulation, it's like we're actually doing the opposite of what they need. So yes, and again, not everybody can access diagnosis, but it does help even if you can self-diagnose, right? And there's so
Mhm,
much content out there around ADHD and around autism and around PMDD, um, to see yourself in it and then make adjustments in your life, right? And do
mhm.
what you need to do to give yourself as best treatment as you can.
Yeah. I actually went recently to get tested for ADHD,
Oh yeah.
because I fit a lot of the profile. Turns out no. Turns out I've just had depression for so long that it's fried my brain.
Hmm.
So I just act like I have ADHD. I'm like, okay, well, at least now I know.
Hmm.
It's at some point, maybe it'll get better.
Hmm.
But it's still like I still find the coping mechanisms for ADHD very helpful because that's just I tend to have a lot of the same issues, even though it's caused by depression and not by, you know, neurological differences.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
brains are weird, life is weird.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, in 20 to 30 years, we're going to be using a lot of different terms. I think
Mhm.
especially for ADHD and autism, we'll have very
Yes.
different understandings of those. Um, and I think that we will hopefully have more of the treatment and skills learning and all that stuff that currently lives in that ADHD and autism world that will bring that more into mental health stuff because that stuff's really valuable because it
Mhm.
is looking at, what is your sensory experience? Um, what's your executive functioning like it's so much more practical and doable than a lot of how we generally look at depression and anxiety where in a lot of those we're not making a lot of progress, um And I just think that bringing in those tools and that understanding from the neurodivergent world, we will have more success with people for sure.
Mhm. And also just thinking too, like, we are so blessed to have the internet and to be able to look this stuff up and research. And even though, sometimes you don't get on the right sites, but we have that ability to look this stuff up. Thinking back to when I was, in my 20s, teenager in my 20s, like the internet was very new. There wasn't a lot on it. Um, and it took me 9 years to get diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian
Mhm.
syndrome, because nobody had heard of it.
Yeah.
And it's a syndrome, which means that everybody has it's a collection of symptoms and it like shows up differently for everybody. So it's really hard to pinpoint, which I get.
Mhm.
But, I knew things were wrong from the time I was like 14, and started getting my periods. And I was like, doesn't seem right. And, a bunch of other stuff going along with it. And it wasn't until I wanted to have children. And I'm
Hmm.
like, so, I went to a new doctor because I had moved to a different country, but I was like, we want to have kids and my body does not work the way that I've read in books it's supposed to. And so he did a bunch of tests. He's like, oh, you've got PCOS. I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, thanks. Like,
Yeah.
you
How did
know,
that take that long?
yeah, I guess it must have been longer than 9 years. But anyways, it was a long time.
Yeah.
Just because again, with the women's health and nobody cares,
No.
or not enough doctors care to learn about these. And I think even PCOS is more, um, what's the word? Recognizable now. It's more women are talking about it and it's being diagnosed more and more, thank God.
Mhm.
But yeah, so PMDD is on that same track. So
Yeah.
hopefully in 20 years,
Right. Yeah.
it'll
But
be
that
more in
is,
the forefront.
yeah, that is, but like you said, like that's the beauty of the internet because now we don't have to just get our information from doctors or textbooks. We get our information from each other
Mhm.
and from that lived experience, which in research is really, poo-pooed and like considered to not be
Like
important. But then
anecdotal.
it's like actually when we want to understand humans, we need to listen to their stories and their experiences, right? And particularly women. So that is just such an incredible thing. And I even say with my clients, right? I'm like, okay, are you on Instagram? Because I've got a bunch of Instagram handles that you should follow, right? Like to start to normalize this, to start to realize like you're not crazy. And like other people are out there and some people have some tricks to help and some people will just make you laugh. Like I love there's this like boyfriend girlfriend that do these ADHD videos of like my girlfriend has ADHD and it's just so hilarious. And then I'm like, oh, you know what? Like I don't have to try so hard to have it together whenever I'm with somebody. Like somebody should love me even when I'm scattered, even
Mhm.
when I like start and stop the same story 5 times, right? Like I don't have to be perfect to be loved. And that is a huge thing for folks with ADHD to really ADHD and autism,
Mhm.
right? To really feel and learn that like, and for everybody, like we just don't
For
have to
everybody.
be,
Yeah,
we don't have to meet some like totally unrealistic, fabricated, idealized version of neurotypical that probably doesn't even exist. We're all
yeah.
actually out there struggling
Yep.
to, be something we're not. And so maybe we just need to like let ourselves be a little messier and be okay with that.
Mhm. And accept our bodies and our brains for however they are,
Yeah.
and just, learn to go through the world as best we can. And when we get those signals that we're not doing okay, that we listen to them
Yeah. 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 And
and
so
talk
when
to
those,
people and find support.
yeah. Yeah. And we reach out, right? And listen to wonderful podcasts like yours, right? That allow people to realize that they're not alone and that it's not, they don't have to feel so much shame and they don't have to feel like they're bad. And yeah, we can just watch our thoughts. We observe them, right? And if they get really hard and heavy and the suicidal thoughts become really overwhelming, we know that we reach out for help and that people love us.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes they come and go in a really lighter way, and we just recognize like, oh, I need to take a bit better care of myself this week.
Yeah.
Mm, Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Parrish, so much for being on the podcast today. I appreciate you for sharing your story and your openness and vulnerability.
Well, thank you so much for doing this podcast. I have lost important people in my life to suicide, and yeah, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to hopefully, help a person if they hear this story and then they
Yes.
realize that maybe they got PMDD, and that would make
Mhm.
everything make a whole lot more sense. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.